We're here at Beachy Head, which is very famous. I mean, everybody knows Sussex, Beachy Head, people killing themselves. I, in fact, had an acquaintance who did kill himself on Beachy Head, so I don't make too many jokes about that one, but it happens. Someone did as well when Heather and I were at college. But the odd thing is, one bloke came down on a motorbike from Scotland. Now, I've been to Scotland. They have some fantastic cliffs in Scotland. There are lots of other great cliffs in the United Kingdom. We're an island. But for some reason, our cliff is the one they choose to kill themselves from. And it is a very spectacular white. Now, you know that Britain is sometimes called Albion. And this is supposed to be because Roman sailors approaching from the southeast came to the chalk part of the island. And it does look white, you know, the White Island, and that's where the name's supposed to come from. But today is very hot, far hotter than I really like it. See, we're the south, we're the hot part of Britain, but hot Britain, it's relative. We get a few weeks a year where you burn up, and I'm literally burning now, and the rest of the year it's pretty miserable, but we've got it. There's a rather lovely local legend, well, it's actually a rather grim local legend, that in the old days when they used to have the customs officers patrolling the shore here, up on the cliffs here, they used to mark it with big lumps of chalk, because the chalk's very white. Even at night you can see that white chalk. It's not quite luminous, but very nearly. And they would know with these lumps of chalk how to stay away from the edge. And local smugglers, well, they moved the markers and customs officer went wallop. And I can believe it, because murdering customs officers in Sussex at one time was considered not a crime. They were considered lower than rats by most of the people. You know, they didn't take a good view of customs and excise in Sussex. Well, I'm having a nice day today. I'm drinking some old rosy cider rather than tea, which is not my... Try and be careful with cider, but it's very nice. Proper cider, proper pectelic haze in it, and I'm frying here, but come and have a look. Those of you who are of the scootering, sharp suit wearing, pill-popping persuasion will recognise this road. This is, of course, the road that Jimmy Cooper takes at the end of Quadrophenia. This is the actual place when he's on his way up to Beachy Head to smash the ace-faced scooter. I've had my fill of what's it in Trying Hard to Love. Well, this is the actual road. This is where it was filmed. So I thought you ought to perhaps at least see it. There's the Belle Tout lighthouse, which I didn't realise till today is actually Lake Georgian. I thought it was much later than that, but it was actually built just before Victoria came to the throne. And of course, you'll remember the Belle Tout lighthouse from the 1980s series with Judy T. Wallace, Life and Loves of the She-Devil, which I'll be honest, I never watched, but was very, very big at the time. This was popular about the same time that Twin Peaks were. You know, it was the thing to see at the time. I think it's been remade since, but that's the road. That is the lighthouse from Life and Loves of the She-Devil. And this is the road that Jimmy rides the Eight Faces scooter along at the end of the film. That line about, my jacket's got to be cut tight and checked with a touch of seersucker and an open neck. I ride a GS scooter with my hair cut neat. I wear my wartime coat in the winter street. Well, this is where it happened. And in fact, if you look up there, that's actually where the scooter goes off the edge. That is actually the place. But of course, Brighton is much more glamorous than Eastbourne, although some of the shots of Brighton in that film are actually Eastbourne, as in Brighton Rock. So there it actually is. This is Beachy Head. This is where the scooter goes over the edge. And Trying Hard to Love, crash. That's where it was done. Famous for lots of people killing themselves, unfortunately. But a very, very beautiful bit of sea. And this is where supposedly that unfortunate customs man that night went splat. And I do feel sorry for him. Although as a Sussex person, one is never supposed to feel sorry for customs and excise. This is not allowed. Julia theory about Quadrophenia and what happened to the characters afterwards, because it's like, I just got this feeling that that character, Jimmy, would have emerged a few years later as a freak, what you across the Atlantic called a hippie. And he probably would have ended up with some posh woman, and they'd have been growing macrobiotic vegetables together in the Welsh borders. I think he'd have been quite happy in later years, once he got all that speed behind him. And the ace face, I believe, would have turned out to be gay. He would have been the front of house manager, which is the foreman of the bellboys, basically, in our business. And, well, what was my business. And he'd have been a horrible drunken old queen who bashed his boyfriend about every weekend. I think that's what would have happened to those characters. And you meet me now for tea at the Birling Gap Hotel, as it used to be. It's now the National Trust Tea Room. And the Birling Gap Hotel is a little bit interesting because this actually was one of the birthplaces of the European Western. When the British film industry was along the coast of Brighton in the early 20th century, because Brighton had the light like Hollywood had the light in America, they used to make films out here, and because of the style of the building, I'll show you it in a bit, this used to be used as the saloon in British Westerns. They used to hitch the horses up outside and the blank pistols would be fired off, blank ammunition in the hotel, and I'm sure it's all very dramatic. None of these films exist anymore. There are still a few stills from them out there. But sadly, all the six-gun play was ended by Gabriello Princip when he emptied his little 32 into the Archduke and started the First World War. And one of the many things that was lost, one of the more trivial ones, but was lost, was the British Western. So when the European Western revived after World War II, you had the spaghetti Western and the sauerkraut Western, but the fish and chip Western did not become a staple of world culture. Bit of a shame, that. Be famous for fossiling. In fact, my brother-in-law used to come here fossiling in the 1970s. It had a national reputation for fossils. But another activity that went on here a lot was, shall we say, a little bit less respectable than fossiling. Back in the days before there was any internet or any grinder in particular, Birling Gap was one of the places people used to go for a bit of the old Irmo Supriobans. And I used to have this friend, he was older than me, he was born in the 40s. I still run into him occasionally. And he often came down here in the summer looking for what gentlemen were looking for. And one time he found a gentleman, and they were down on the beach just below the hotel here. And they were doing what they were doing, and he heard an almighty thud, boom, boom. So him and his trade had a little look around, and they couldn't see anything. They couldn't see anything, and as they were having a good time, they got back to what they were doing. Well, when things had happened and were over, as these things do have an end, they put their clothes back on, and the other one said, "Over there." And they looked over there, and there was, unfortunately, it's rather grim, a man had died. He had actually plunged from the cliff whilst they were doing what they were doing, and splat, he was dead on the beach, not that far from him. That's what they'd heard, you know, they hadn't noticed it, but they'd heard him go, wallop. So they came up here, rang the emergency services. Of course, it was obvious that it was more likely a bit late for an ambulance, but the authorities got down there, picked up the guy's remains. He was quite an elderly man, apparently, and they were talking to, I presume it was the police or whoever, and they said, well, it may not have been suicide, it may not have been deliberate. These cliffs are rather treacherous, and it's possible that he was looking at something and got so engrossed in what he was looking at that he slipped and splat. And this man said to me, he said, it was us. He was looking at us, and so engrossed in looking at us that he went wallop and hit the beach. And he said, I've done it. I've finally done it. I always knew I would. I've killed a man with sex. It wasn't the way I thought I'd kill a man with sex, but I've killed a man with sex. And I will always think of that story whenever I think of Birling Gap. Now we're at Eastbourne, which is quite famous. Not least because Grayson Perry lived here recently. It's quite an expensive village to live in. And it feels rather strange to me because this is very much tourist Sussex, and in a way I feel more like I'm in Devon or somewhere, because that's where I've been a tourist, whereas here in Sussex I generally worked for tourists. Tourism was kind of my business, you know, working in hotels for many years. So it feels literally like a busman's holiday. It feels very, very strange for me to be a tourist rather than working for tourists. And the tiger is immensely famous. There's a story that early in the 19th century, a customs official retired and bought a farm here, which cost more money than he could have earned in his entire lifetime. And he married a much younger wife. She was only about 19, I think. And she was the daughter of a man who was reputed to be the largest smuggler in the area, which I think might explain how he could afford his farm and how he didn't get shot. People who didn't take bribes, bang. That's how it tended to work around here in those days.